Should I stand over this way now?
You're
Since the
fine.
dog's gone?
No, yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Since the dog's gone, that's better.
That's mine. You want one?
So, first of all, if you're here intentionally, thank you guys very much. If you're just here for AC and beer, I'm sorry. Hopefully you'll learn something, but we'll see how it goes. So we're going to be talking about just war, AI, and the future of international relations. Do I just point at you to advance the slide?
Yeah.
So we're going to start today talking about just war tradition and honor, and then moving along to AI and what it means for international relations. War is both timeless and ever-changing. While the basic nature of war is constant, the methods and means we use constantly evolve. In the same way that theories about war and the study of war, same thing goes with international relations. So while today's warfighters still look back to Sun Tzu and von Clausewitz for lessons that they can take into war, we still look back as international relations scholars to Hans Morgenthau and the scholars that came before us and try and move that forward. We'll start with the foundation of what is just war. Then we'll look at the kinds of AR that are already in use or on the horizon. From there, we'll look at the specific challenges in the just war theory that these technologies bring to us, and then the broader challenges to the international order that the theories that we use to describe power and the way that nations deal with each other are played out. So what is just war? Just war is a framework that we use to describe morality in warfare. Scholars have been writing about it for thousands of years, starting with the Romans, going forward through the Christian era, and into modern times. We have used the terms jus in bellum, which is when is it right to go to war, and jus in bello, how should war be fought? And that morality has always come from human judgment, and that human judgment basically allows us to take what we know and how we want to be treated and move that forward as to like if you're the conflict. So war is as old as human society. The constraints on it are older still. So move forward one. Yeah. So starting with Cicero, he was Roman, so obviously he had a lot to say about honor and reputation. And his writings on war, he felt that war should be only fought in self-defense, kind of counter to what we know about the Romans. But in that, he had the caveat, honor and reputation is a reason to defend. So something that we would say may not necessarily be like, oh, you insulted me, that's not self-defense. Today, that's what the Romans considered self-defense. Early Christian thinkers like St. Augustine of Hippo, he started to try to reconcile pacifist notions of Christianity with this Roman tradition. He was in the late Roman period when Christianity had already taken over the empire. He was trying to figure out, how do we tell people the 10 Commandments say don't kill people, but we need you to go kill people. So he was trying to figure that out. And one of the interesting things about St. Augustine, he's also the one who came up with the concept of original sin. He came up with it as a way to basically, I think, absolve himself of some of the things that he liked to do, which was drinking and whoring. And so he tried to describe mankind as being, that's an aside, sorry. And then later Christian thinkers, St. Thomas Aquinas, took the system of just war that had developed through the Middle Ages, and he then took it and codified it, and he made it about three key things: legitimate authority, just cause, and right intention, meaning the good and the restoration of peace. So the goal of the war should be to resolve the conflicts between two nations and carry that forward in a way that would bring about peace to the general concept of Europe. And then later on, we get to more modern scholars. Michael Walzer is particularly influential. His book, Just and Unjust Wars, looked at the history of the United States, looked at the conflict in Vietnam, looked at the different things that we had done over time in different countries, and he prescribed to just war the concepts of rational control, proportionality, and a moral judgment that is implicitly human moral judgment on what is right and what is wrong. And those things have, in the modern era, has influenced international law, UN treaties, and things like the Geneva Convention. How we conduct war in a moral way. We don't just go all out. We have proportionality. We have these judgment calls. We have always relied on leaders to be the moral guides for our nations. And sometimes they fail and sometimes they're okay. But that has been the way that most Western nations have fought wars for the last few centuries. Move that forward, just if you can move forward, sorry. So how does honor come into play? Well, we talked about Rome. In ancient Rome, Cicero tried it to virtue and just conduct. And then defending the honor and reputation of one's country could lead to a just cause of war. In the Christian era, Augustine, he didn't really see honor as playing into it. He felt that, Roman obsession with glory and earthly honor, it was rooted in pride. It was a sin. So he wanted to make it more about, be able to pursue justice for the glory of God. So not for yourself, it was for the church, and it was for humanity as a whole, and that's where honor was felt. And that developed later into the medieval and chivalric codes where a knight would fight for good and justice and honor. And that's how we developed the concept, and it comes forward as a just war tradition across those things. So that's also where we get the phrases like duty, honor, country. Those concepts come from the chivalric code. While some cultures might consider it a moral imperative to go to war, only as a last resort, when all other peaceful means and settlements may have been failed, other countries and cultures may not have that same hesitancy. And that is the conflict that we have with just war. Just war tradition is generally a Western theoretical thought. It comes from a Judeo-Christian background as far as morality. So while we might feel that pull, other cultures, other religions, other places in the world, they don't have that same value system. So when we're talking about war on an international scale, that's where things become a little bit sticky. And that's going to lead into what we're talking about next, because while we adhere to the Geneva Convention and we adhere to certain things, as we know from World War II and past things, lots of other cultures don't necessarily adhere to those when they're dealing with prisoners, when they're dealing with conduct, with landmines. And our understanding of all of that has also evolved as we've gone forward. We no longer use landmines. Well, as we're about to talk about, some of the autonomous weapon systems that AI can create are essentially landmines with a little bit more discernment. So then how do we judge that? And so that's where we'll move forward to. So what are the kinds of AI in modern warfare? We're looking at three things generally. The first two are the most prevalent, and then there's also broader applications which have a little bit less gray area. They're worth mentioning, but they're not really necessarily things that have the same impact as far as like what it's going to do to fighting war morally. Autonomous weapon systems are, as I described them, they're kind of like landmines. They're the drones that are circling over Ukraine right now, where they have an image recognition software. They can identify a tank. They're just loitering over an area. They see a tank. They drop down. They don't require any human to approve that order. And that is one of the more scary things. Think of it like a Terminator, basically. People, they just go out there, they do stuff. We program them. It's like, hey, this is what all the bad guys' tanks look like. We're going to go out there and kill all of those. Well, these are what the bad guys' soldiers look like. And then it's like, oh, well, what if the soldiers look like civilians? And that's where you get into a gray area. Then we talk about things that are how are those going to be bound by international agreements? How are those things going to be regulated across international boundaries? The UN is attempting things, but we'll see how this goes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the second one is, sorry, go back one more, sorry. No, one more. Second one is decision support and targeting systems. And those are large language learning models. They're your ChatGPT, your Grok, except for instead of scraping for the best recipe for a gravy or the best recipe for a cake, they're scraping the internet for people who are affiliated with terrorist organizations. They're scraping the internet for the social media of Hamas. They're scraping the internet for all kinds of things like that in order to create targeting packages for intelligence services. And so that's also something where the system will then present those things to an intelligence officer. The intelligence officer will present that to someone further up the chain, and that thing creates a kinetic action to eliminate that target. Well, the whole goal in having that kind of thing is to have what we call a human in the loop, somebody who is at the end of the line after all this information's come down. They look at that information and they make the human judgment. Is this actually a target? Is this something that we need to do? Is this right and just according to my nation's rules of engagement? And that is the issue that we're going to talk about a little bit more as we go forward. So moving forward to a little bit more about the automated weapon systems. So when we talk about the just war theories of jus in bello, like the conduct of war, that's where it comes into, because AI can struggle in its current iterations to identify certain things. There's a really good YouTube about some Marine guys. They were testing the image systems with the AI, and the Marines that they were testing it with realized that they just needed to walk funny or put themselves under a box, and the AI couldn't identify them. So think Monty Python, the Ministry of Funny Walks. They just started walking not like a human, and all of a sudden they could trick the AI. The problem is that can go the other way. A kid carrying a broomstick can look a lot like a soldier carrying a rifle from 10,000 feet up. So that's a possibility that it's just going to create issues. And those are issues that those are things that are being brought up as we talk about automated weapon systems. That seems to be the most prevalent part of the conversation for a lot of scholars and a lot of people who are looking at these issues. Even the last two popes, the current Pope Leo the 14th and Pope Francis, actually saw those technologies and in rare form issued eclectical letters dealing with morality in war and the kinds of things that these automated weapon systems, the moral judgments that these automated systems bring up. And it's like we've already, as a society, gone beyond where we want to use landmines or cluster munitions or things that indiscriminately kill. Do we want to go back to that just because we have a technology that's 90% efficient? So a lot of those things are brought up as issues because you don't have any human moral judgment as part of the system. Like I said, discrimination, proportionality, and then there's also the accountability gap. Who is responsible? Who is legally responsible? Who is morally responsible? Is it the state that does those weapons? Is it the commander that orders their deployment? Is it the manufacturer? So who in the chain carries the moral responsibility and the moral weight to make those decisions? And that becomes a gray area that we need to address before we deploy these systems. Move. Sorry, I was behind on the slide. And then and then AI decision support systems. And decision support systems are the thing that I'm particularly interested in. They lead to what I would call the issue is abdication of responsibility. One of the things that happens, as we described earlier, you get into this loop where you've got a support system, an AI that is pulling information from all over the place. It's pulling it from intelligence data, it's pulling it from the internet, it's creating packages. And as that gets more reliable, commanders start to look at it, oh, this is 90% reliable, it's 95% reliable. And then things happen and you get a do loop, and people start to act a little bit faster on it. So while we start with things like, so the United States has a AI, and we call it Maven. We started about 10 years ago. And Maven pulls in intelligence data and it creates targeting packages for us. The Israelis use one, they call theirs Lavender, and they have another one called Hapsura. And one of the starkest examples in the most recent Gaza war that was caused by the October 7th, the terrorist attacks, where 800 people were killed, 800 civilians were killed in a single day, including 300 at a music festival. And so you've got this massive terrorist attack, Hamas coming across the border, and then Israel decides to mobilize. And they have these new systems. They don't know who to target, so they go to their AI systems. And over the course of the war, the AI system generates 37,000 targets for the Israelis. And they kill pretty much every single one of them as a Hamas. So the system worked basically too well. At the beginning of the war, the Israeli Defense Forces were checking every single package, and they were looking at it and, is this actual Hamas? Like, where have you pulled this information from? You know, can we track where this person is? All of this information, like what is the collateral damage from attacking this person? And then as the war started to speed up and things started to go faster and faster, they started to get used to the system. They started to trust the system. And one IDF officer speaking to a journalist said, I want to make sure I get this right, so I'll read it exactly. I would invest 20 seconds for each target at this stage. We would do dozens of them every day. I had zero value as a human apart from being a stamp of approval. It saved lots of time. If a target came up in the automated mechanism, I checked if he was a man, and then I would give permission to bomb him, subject to the examination of the collateral damage. And then they would use other AI to judge the collateral damage. They had another little system that they called Where's Daddy? And that would basically track based on the phone data of this target when he was home so that they knew he was there, and that's where they would attack. Not exactly moral. There's some gray area. I'm not going to get into the politics of Israel and all of that. But that's what AI can do. And if your commanders have pressure upon them to trust the system, or they have pressure upon them to, produce targets, those pressures are going to come out in a human way. And if the system is 90% reliable, 95% reliable, 99% reliable, you're going to less and less start, hesitate when you have to approve that. So then that's where the question comes in. Does that then erode the moral judgment of a human in the loop? And that's where we're going forward now. And that's the automation bias. So while we have speed, we have compression of the deliberation, and then we have the possibility of commanders, because they're not trusting the system, them being, basically their career's ruined. It's like, hey, we had this targeting package, you didn't order it, such and such happened. This guy doesn't approve any problems. So I'm not sure what. Yeah. So here's where it also gets more interesting and more scary. Hope everybody has beer, like I said, from the perspective of international relations theory. So while in the West, we are pushing our commanders to take that moral time, to make that moral judgment, to try to adhere to the tradition that we have always fought with, that we are fighting with principles, we're fighting with, we're not going to use these munitions. We agree to the Geneva Convention, all this kind of stuff. China does not. They don't care. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party has the goal for the AI and their military to basically take over as a mid-level commander. The People's Liberation Army is making significant investments in algorithmic AI, decision-making things, so that their commanders, their mid-level commanders who they don't trust to make decisions, will use the AI to make the decisions. The evidence this has come from lots of recently available open source requests. For some reason, they decided to let their military procurement website open, and a bunch of scholars found this data, and they basically have tracked this down. And we know through open source, not even our intelligence, that their goal is to give, an AI-generated course of action to their commanders. Essentially, they're looking at an indispensable digital staff officer, is what they call it. So they want their commanders to follow the orders of the AI decision-making software. This is the crux of everything. This would create an unprecedented sea change in not only the way that countries deal with each other, but also international relations theory. Because now we have one country that wants humans in the loop and they want a moral compass, and we have another country that wants to take the human element out of it so that their commanders make decisions based on what the algorithm says and not what their own moral judgments say. Cool. So, just to kind of go through it, basically what we're looking at is the erosion of human moral judgment, either through the abdication of the decision-making process through speed, as it is in the West, or in the deliberate abdication of decision-making in the case of China, where they do not want their commanders to follow it. So this undermines everything that we know about international relations theory. It undermines the just war tradition, and it gets a little bit scary. So how does this affect IR theory? Well, international relations theory is based, there's several theories of international relations. The two most prevalent are realism, which is concerned with power, how states make decisions. Basically, it's the strongest bully on the playground argument. The nation with the most power is the one that calls the shots. Liberalism is similar to realism in that it recognizes those powers, but it also sees that power can be constrained by international law and institutions. It's supportive of the UN. It's supportive of, the World Court, things like that, the Geneva Convention. It pushes that international order essentially creates a better version of the world, and we're all better for it. It kind of breaks down to peer pressure and then how we control other countries, because there really is nothing, we don't have a world police. We just have a realist power who can say, hey, don't do that, and go smack them down. But it does rely a lot on nations basically telling each other, hey, we're not acting like that here, stop acting like a fool. And then constructivism is a little bit carried forward from that. It's shared norms, and it works good when you look at hemispherically, the West versus the East. When you look at culturally, this country is, or economically, like countries tend to get along in like ways. It doesn't really do a great job of how countries do without shared institutions. And really the only shared institution that we have is globalism and trade. And as we've learned from COVID, that's starting to break down a little bit. When we learned, that, hey, all of our toilet paper comes from one country and we can't use it. It kind of breaks down globalism a little bit. Like, we can't rely on a single source for all of our supplies, and that breaks down the constructivist argument. So where do we go from here? Well, all existing IR theory relies on humans. It relies on a human judgment, whether it's in a system, whether it's somebody who will adhere to international law, whether it's we have to rely on our leaders, either elected, appointed, or there by coup. Those people are human. At the end of the day, they're going to do what's in the best self-interest. As a democracy, we like to rely on the fact that we believe that we pick somebody, or the majority at least pick somebody who is going to speak for us and keep our moral character as a nation in the forefront of their decision-making process. We have to have trust in that. Otherwise, it all kinds of falls apart. But when one nation has humans in control and another nation puts their tactical and strategic military assets in the form, to a computer control, then we get a little bit dicey. So What do we do with existing IR theory when they all rely on a human to make the decision? So moving forward, so this is kind of like a little overview of realism. I probably shouldn't have left those in there. You can go a couple. Yeah, we covered that. So algorithmic realism is what I'm proposing as part of my dissertation. Basically, it's a hybrid theory. It involves a lot of post-human theory because it pulls in realist theory as far as power. It pulls in liberalism because we require international law to kind of push these things onto other nations. But it also emerges, it deals with the issues of the rubber stamp in warfare. It deals with human command authority. And it bridges the three traditions of realism, constructivism, and liberalism into a single framework that kind of gets rid of some of the issues that they have, and then helps us bring forward, what's needed. So realism kind of explains the competition between nations, like we said. Powerful nations rise to the top, weak nations are subordinate to them. Constructivism, how it kind of deals with how AI and ethics are changing, because what we decide is, if our nation decides that, hey, actually we're cool with autonomous weapons systems because they do this and they do that, that's going to change the way that we deal with warfare. We don't do a lot of things like cluster munitions. We don't do landmines anymore. So this is going to be something that's a different aspect, and it's something we're going to need to deal with morally through policymakers and our elected leaders, or we may just leave it to the military and they'll do it. And then liberalism is going to hopefully explain how we do this. And there is a need for the Western nations to get together and be like, all right, how are you going to train your AI? Are you going to give it a moral compass? Because it is possible to give an AI a moral framework. It's basically, I say AI, but it's not really an intelligence. It's a algorithm that you're feeding information to. And that's one of the issues that we're going to have, is we're going to run out of human-generated information, and then the AI is going to start feeding itself more AI information and content that is created. So anything you search, it's going to pull. Right now, it pulls from the internet, it pulls from wherever, and it gives you the combination of all this human stuff. Well, they're finding bleed over now, where it pulls from other AIs. So Grok will pull something that ChatGPT created, which is just, something else. And anybody who's ever dealt with a photograph or a digital file, it degrades over time. The quality degrades over time. You can't go back to the original quality of like human created content. So you're just going to get more and more trash going into the system. And that's going to create a problem as well. So I've proposed, as part of a theory, because this is what we do as scholars, it's boring, 5 axioms, basically that human responsibility remains necessary for countries to, who are going to follow the just war tradition and are going to try to keep their countries, their nations moral. They need to do everything they possible to keep humans in the loop. And at the same time, recognize that war is moving really, really quickly. Hypersonic weapons, all kinds of things like that. The speed of needing, with drone capabilities, all that kind of stuff. You need to be able to move at that speed. So you have to find balance between how do we maintain our morality and how are we able to compete and still stave off any attacks from other countries. And then opacity becomes power. So basically, by keeping our algorithms secret and trying to find out what other people's algorithms are trained with, that's how you find power in this new dynamic. Essentially, you can have a very powerful nation who has crappy AI, or you can have a smaller nation which has much more capable AI and nobody knows what their AI is capable of. They are inherently more powerful than a lot of people realize. So we need to look at that as a new field of intelligence service, a new field of military is looking at those capabilities. Knowing how someone trains their AI is also going to give you an insight into what their actions would be. If we knew exactly how the Chinese were going to train the AI that they plan on giving to their commanders, we could counter it. And so that becomes a power dynamic in this new world order. And then preemptive battle becomes war by code. Essentially, you're looking at, again, the same thing, like changes to the AI, changes to that are going to cause shifts in which nations are powerful, which nations are not powerful. The ones that develop their AIs and things like that the fastest are going to rise to the top. Because even though they might be small nations with small manufacturing capabilities, if they put their resources into the right things, they're going to be able to take leaps and bounds ahead. And then finally, it's the hope that ethics moves into the data trading. So how that moves into how we train our military, how other nations train their military, how they train their military AIs. You can plug in just war theory into a algorithm that you're going to use, and it will make better decisions based on those theories. And so hopefully that's the change that we're going to see. That's basically the goal of the policy. And so what are the implications? Well, we're dealing with a new international order, essentially. The just war tradition has carried us through thousands of years. We've long sought to make war as clean as possible. It's also there's also a little bit of a theory out there that has also caused a lot of the issues that we have with our soldiers. There's a theory that actually just war theory and morality in war, because we don't explain it anymore, or because that religious authority is gone from our governments. What actually is caused by what a lot of the PSD that's caused is actually they're calling it a moral injury now. It's the inability of the soldier to reconcile their actions with the moral code that they were brought up with. So take a soldier who was brought up in a church, an Eagle Scout, who believed in God and country and duty and honor, and then he's ordered by his government to go do these things, and he can't reconcile in the same way because he doesn't have that same foundation that we used to teach of a just war theory of you're doing this for God's appointed king. Or whatever, like there's no priests like saying, oh, this is just because this is happening, these atrocities are happening. And so it's a side issue. Sorry, it's getting a little off on a tangent because it's something I'm also passionate about, is looking at a way that just war theory and things like that can actually help people. But carrying that forward, it's going to get even harder, because when those soldiers or airmen, whoever's pushing the button, ends up seeing the result of what it is, like they need to know that their leaders have their back, and they're only leading them into conflicts that do follow a moral code, that are justified, that are principled. And those things have real consequences for people, but they also have real consequences for nations. How we deal with each other as a nation and other nations plays into global stability and those kinds of things. And hopefully, we can get some new international treaties and some new order to it, so that we know how we're being dealt with, and then where that accountability comes into everybody. So fortunately, there is a glimmer of hope. I'll give you the high end at the end here. So I don't know how many people watched it at the Air Force commencement ceremony. President J.D. Vance reaffirmed America's longstanding commitment to trying to fight war justly. And he made it clear to the new cadets, today's warfighters have a moral responsibility in navigating the battlefield that is new to all of us, the battlefield with AI. We must not outsource matters of life and death to machines. And so no matter what you think about any administration, it's important that we try to hold all of our leaders, no matter who they are, to uphold that moral code as we go forward. Just as a little, as we approach our 250th year as a nation, that we continue to strive to be a moral nation that acts upon principle in an unprincipled world. That's hard when you have countries like China who want to want to move the ball forward and don't want to have humans involved because they feel like the moral judgment of their leaders will inhibit their goals. That's a hard thing to do, to tell people that, hey, you need to be moral and you need to fight clean and they're going to fight dirty. And the only way that we can resolve that is to, just always try to be on the side of right, and do a better job than any other nation. And I think we owe that as a responsibility not only to the people who came before us, but to our descendants, that we try to fight our wars as a nation in a moral way. So happy to take questions, talk about it. We can do that all off on the side, though. Thank you guys very much. Hopefully that was enlightening and not too boring. And thank you guys very much. And thank you, Katie, for having me here.